Welcome to a conversation about the machinery and the money behind artificial intelligence. Patrick O'Shaughnessy sits down with Gavin Baker of Atreides Management, one of the sharpest technology investors around, to explain the rapidly evolving AI landscape in plain terms. The war between Nvidia and Google, what the latest models tell us about scaling, why the economics of AI look nothing like software, and where the real constraints and opportunities lie. What follows is organized by theme, so you can follow the argument from the physics of the chips all the way to the investment implications. Gemini 3 and the scaling law that held. Baker's starting point is that Google's Gemini 3 model was hugely important because it showed, unequivocally, that the scaling laws for pre-training are still intact. This mattered because Gemini 3 was arguably the first real test of pre-training scaling since Nvidia's Hopper chips arrived. For roughly a year and a half, the industry had been stuck waiting on the next generation of hardware, with no clean new test of whether bigger models trained on more data would keep getting better. Gemini 3 answered that. They do. And because the different scaling laws are multiplicative, a stronger base model now gets multiplied by the newer techniques layered on top, which means the models trained on the next generation of chips are, in Baker's words, going to be amazing. He also describes how he keeps up. You have to actually use the tools and pay for the top tier, because the free version behaves like a 10-year-old while the paid version is a fully capable adult. And he follows the few hundred people on Earth who truly understand this field, reading everything Andrej Karpathy writes at least 3 times. The 3 scaling laws. Baker frames all of modern AI progress around 3 scaling laws that multiply together. The first is pre-training. The original observation that models improve as you add compute, data, and parameters, which requires enormous coherent clusters of chips. The second is post-training reinforcement learning with verified rewards, and the word verified is the crucial one. He quotes Karpathy's line that anything you can verify, you can automate. Any task with a clear right or wrong outcome. Did the books balance? Did you make the sale? Did the customer ask to escalate? Did you win the game? Can be improved through reinforcement learning, just like AlphaGo learning from whether it won or lost. The third is test time compute, letting the model think longer at the moment you ask it a question. He points out that essentially all the progress from late 2024 through Gemini 3 came from those 2 newer laws, not from pre-training. And that reasoning, as it's called, is still very early. Why nobody actually understands scaling? Here Baker makes a point that should keep everyone humble. No one on Earth actually knows how or why the scaling laws work. It isn't really a law at all. It's an empirical observation, measured extremely precisely and holding for a long time, but not genuinely understood. He reaches for a wonderful analogy. The ancient Egyptians and the builders of Stonehenge aligned their monuments perfectly to the equinox, measuring the movement of the sun with astonishing precision, yet they had no idea why the sun rose in the east and set in the west. They thought their god drove a chariot across the sky. We are in the same position with scaling. We can measure it exquisitely, but we cannot derive it, which is exactly why every fresh confirmation, like Gemini 3, carries so much weight. Nvidia versus Google in fighter planes. The single most useful way to conceptualize everything in AI, Baker argues, is the struggle between Google and Nvidia. Nvidia sells the full stack. Google has its own custom chip, the TPU. To make the state of the race vivid, he uses fighter planes as a stand-in for chip generations. Nvidia's Hopper, he says, is like the P-51 Mustang, the finest airplane of the Second World War. Google's 2024 and 2025 TPUs are like F-4 Phantoms, 2 generations newer. And Nvidia's Blackwell is the F-35. The punchline is that because Blackwell was delayed and hard to bring online, Google trained Gemini 3 on its Phantom-era TPUs, while Nvidia's F-35 wasn't yet flying at scale, which handed Google a real but temporary advantage in pre-training. There is also a hard physical ceiling in play. After xAI managed to link 200,000 Hopper chips into a single coherent cluster, you simply couldn't go further, and progress stalled until better chips arrived. Why Blackwell was so hard? Baker calls the move from Hopper to Blackwell the most complex product transition technology has ever gone through. Going from one to the other meant going from air cooling to liquid cooling, tripling the weight of a rack from around 1,000 pounds to 3,000, and quadrupling its power draw from roughly the electricity of 30 American homes to 130. He likens it to being told that, just to get your new phone, you must rewire your whole house to 220 volts, install a home battery, a generator, solar panels, a humidification system, and reinforce the floor because it can't bear the weight. That is why Blackwell only began deploying at scale recently. And it explains Nvidia's reliance on xAI, which builds data centers faster than anyone. By deploying the newest chips first and at scale, xAI effectively works out the bugs for everyone else, which is why the first Blackwell trained model is likely to come from xAI in early 2026. The ASIC challenge. If custom chips are so attractive, why doesn't everyone build one? Baker's answer is that a chip is never just a chip. You can design the accelerator, but then you need the networking card, the central processor, the scale-up switch, the scale-out switch, the optics, and the software to make it all work together. And only then do you realize how small a piece the original chip was. It takes at least 3 generations to make a good one. Google's TPU wasn't competitive until its 3rd or 4th. Amazon has arguably the best chip team of any company, and even its Trainium is only now approaching good. Nvidia's response to the threat, from both Jensen Huang and rivals like Lisa Su, is simply to accelerate, to ship a new GPU every year so nobody can keep pace, and Baker expects the gap to widen when the next chip, Rubin, arrives. His prediction is that only 2 custom chips really matter: Google's TPU and Amazon's Trainium. Google, the low-cost producer of tokens. Then comes an insight Baker calls genuinely new. In his entire career as a technology investor, being the low-cost producer has never mattered. Apple isn't valuable for making the cheapest phone, nor Microsoft the cheapest software. AI is the first time it matters, because you have to recompute the answer every single time. Google has been the lowest cost producer of tokens, and it has used that position to suck the economic oxygen out of the whole AI ecosystem. The logic is coldly rational. If you have a decisive cost advantage and you also own search and a dozen other profitable businesses, why not run AI at a negative 30% margin and starve your capital-hungry competitors of the oxygen they need to raise money? But Baker adds a twist. Once Blackwell scales, especially the excellent GB300, he thinks Google will no longer be the low-cost producer, and running deep negative margins as the high-cost producer would start to hurt even Google's stock. The new economics of AI. This leads to the heart of the matter for investors. AI is the opposite of software economics. A great software company enjoys gross margins of 70 to 90%. A great AI company might run near 40, because every query consumes real compute. Baker is blunt. If you try to preserve an 80% margin structure, you are guaranteed to fail in AI, because the native AI companies will happily operate below 35% and undercut you. He points out that AI natives still generate cash early, not from fat margins, but from having very few employees. He compares it to the shift from packaged software to the cloud, which crushed margins yet created enormous businesses, and to physical retailers who saw customers wanting e-commerce but refused to accept its thinner margins, a historic mistake. Margins, he insists, can change, and the companies that cling to the old structure will be turned off, one by one, as someone else's agent quietly takes over access to their systems. Capex, returns, and the bubble question. Is this an enormous bubble? Baker's answer is grounded in data. The return on AI spending has, empirically and unambiguously, been positive. The biggest buyers of chips are public companies with audited accounts, and their returns on capital are actually higher than before they ramped their spending, thanks to cost savings and to moving giant advertising and recommendation systems onto GPUs. He does flag a genuine risk, a stretch of a few quarters where capex is unimaginably high and the newest chips are used only for training, which earns no return until inference kicks in, and he notes Meta already printed a quarter where its returns dipped. But he sees 2 natural governors against a wild overbuild. Taiwan's semiconductor, which is so paranoid about overbuilding that its caution acts as a brake, and the memory chip cycle. He also observes that we've had rolling bubbles for years: electric vehicle startups, meme stocks, and now quantum and nuclear names, where the theme is real but the public ways to invest in it usually aren't. Power is the real constraint. For a long time, Baker says, power was the most boring topic imaginable. Suddenly, he spends his days trying to find gigawatts. And when power is the binding constraint, the economics flip in a way people miss. The price you pay for compute becomes irrelevant, because a chip that delivers 3, 4, or 5 times more tokens per watt delivers that many times more revenue from the same electricity. He gives an example. An advanced Nvidia data center might cost $50 billion and produce $25 billion in revenue, while a cheaper custom chip data center costs $35 billion but produces only 8. And as long as power is the governor, the best product wins regardless of price, with extraordinary pricing power. On supply, he's realistic. America can't build nuclear fast enough because of permitting, so the near-term answers are natural gas and solar, which is why so much activity is landing in places like Abilene, Texas, sitting on top of a giant gas basin. He marvels at how fast public opinion swung in favor of nuclear right when AI needed it. An example of his recurring theme that whenever a bottleneck threatens to slow technology down, everything accelerates to break it. The 4 labs that matter. Baker is clear that only 4 labs truly matter: OpenAI, Google's Gemini, xAI, and Anthropic. Reasoning, he argues, restarted the classic flywheel. A better product attracts users, whose usage generates data, which makes the product better still, because verified feedback from millions of users can now be fed back into training. Each of the 4 also guards a more advanced internal model that it uses to train the next one. And if you don't have that latest checkpoint, catching up is brutally hard. He points to the failures as proof of difficulty. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg declared in early 2025 that Meta would have the most capable AI that year, and was as wrong as it was possible to be. Microsoft and Amazon both stumbled too. Keeping a huge cluster running at 90% uptime rather than 30 is genuinely hard, and beyond that it takes taste. The intuition to know which expensive experiments to run when you can't test them cheaply. He's impressed by xAI, whose model he recommends and which now processes more tokens on some measures than its rivals. He describes OpenAI as being in a kind of code red, a high-cost producer racing to vertically integrate through Stargate against more than $1 trillion of commitments. And he notes Anthropic is burning far less cash, growing faster, and has just signed a large deal with Nvidia. On China, he calls Chinese open-source models a gift, but argues their refusal of Blackwell was a mistake that will leave them further behind once those chips scale. Investment implications. For investors, Baker expects attention to broaden beyond the handful of megacaps to the other roughly 490 companies in the index, as more of them report real, quantified benefits from AI. His favorite example is the freight broker C.H. Robinson, which historically quoted prices within 15 to 45 minutes and only responded to about 60% of requests. With AI, it now quotes all of them in seconds, and the stock jumped around 20% on that news. Evidence that AI is hitting both revenue and costs at once. Venture investors, he notes, are more bullish than public ones because they can see companies reaching a given level of revenue with far fewer employees. He's skeptical that venture firms will beat private equity at private equity's own 50-year-old game, but expects PE to be very good at systematically applying AI. And he flags the bear cases he takes seriously. Above all, edge AI, the possibility that phones run good enough models for free on the device, which is precisely Apple's strategy, alongside the chance that scaling simply slows. The industry, he says, must now hand off from raw intelligence to genuine usefulness, which is mostly about holding context and doing tasks reliably, from booking a dinner to planning an entire family vacation. The wildest card, data centers and space. Baker says his most off-the-wall prediction for the end, and he believes it may be the most important thing to happen in the world over the next few years: data centers and space. Reason it out from first principles, he says. The inputs are power, cooling, and chips. In orbit, you can keep a satellite in permanent sunlight, where the sun is about 30% more intense and delivers several times the energy, and because it's never dark, you need no expensive batteries. The cheapest energy in the solar system is solar energy in space. Cooling becomes free. Just point a radiator at the dark side, toward near absolute zero. Networking gets faster, because the only thing quicker than a laser through fiber is a laser through the vacuum. And satellites can beam directly to phones, cutting out the entire terrestrial hop. The one gating constraint is launch capacity, which needs many starships. And here he notes Elon Musk's claim that Tesla, SpaceX, and XAI are converging. The intelligence for Tesla's robots, the data centers in space to power it all, and a ready set of customers to build against. It is a fittingly cosmic place to end a conversation that began with rocks we taught to think.